Mr. Barrett, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Your study outlines a concerning picture of IT procurement practices within the federal government. You've mentioned that nearly a quarter of the $20 billion spent on IT contracts has gone to 3 firms. A quarter of $20 billion going to just 3 firms. Can you elaborate on how the government's failure to diversify its suppliers has led to higher costs and less innovation for the IT systems?
Yeah, I think that the kind of connection there is that for a whole bunch of reasons, certain firms are kind of have an incumbent advantage. Often, because the process is from the external, sort of from the perspective of those bidding for contracts, because there are so many hoops to jump through, it can be difficult for smaller firms to bid. So you end up in a case where you set up sort of the big firms to continue to get contracts. And so, why does that lead to lower quality outcomes? Is that the idea? Okay, I mean, part of it is just the basics of, not being able to force sort of competitive pressure against these vendors, because they're going to keep winning these contracts, whatever the outcomes, really. I mean, and it is remarkable how often, despite project failure or underperformance, these contracts might still be issued to those vendors. Part of that is we don't have a clear way of assessing what project success looks like. We don't have strong data on and proactively disclose data on whether or not a project led to a good outcome. And that's something that we couldn't determine from our data. We can see how much we spent on contracts. We don't even know what was produced from that. And this is a really common phenomenon. In interviews I've done with U.S. public servants, the same conversation comes up, that there's sort of a small cluster of 3 to 5 big firms at any given time. And sometimes it switches who's in the lead, but roughly, 3 to 5 different firms. And they'll move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, delivering bad projects, and they keep getting hired, in part because no one's talking about it and no one's disclosing it in ways that make sense.
So I want to pick up on 2 things there. The first is you talk about how larger companies seem to just perform better in terms of their success in achieving contracts. But we've heard that a company like KPMG, which is massive, was instructed by the public service to be a subcontractor to a firm that is objectively tiny, in GC Strategies, 2 people. So how is that possible when, for all of the reasons that you said, it's true that larger firms perform better? How do we end up in a situation where we're using a firm that doesn't add any value? Its supposed value is to source expertise, to source resources, but instead costs the taxpayers 30%, up to 30% more. But KPMG is a known commodity and is the heavy hitter in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I should really clarify. I think those big firms perform better in winning contracts, but they don't perform better in producing good services.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's that key to get it, to clarify. And I know you know that, but I just wanted to make sure I was being clear. How can something like GC Strategies arise? I agree that it is, and all the information we've been learning is that it's surprising. It's not surprising, but it's shocking and concerning. I think part of it is just that we don't have that strong culture internally of scrutinizing value for money when it comes to these contracts. And there's a kind of, we're habituated to simply kind of trust, I think, that the firms that are winning the contracts are going to deliver. I think the Auditor General, in the case of ArriveCan in particular, also just highlighted basic breaches of responsible public service, right? So I think there's also that piece. And I will say that in interviews that I've done across a whole range of countries that are really leading in digital transformation, they are not worried about their relationship with vendors. They always say, we manage that because we have good internal rules, we have good organizational hygiene, we have sufficient IT expertise to hold them to account. So they would never fall for an a GC Strategies type scam, because they put those conditions in place. And they also really always emphasize that these things happen in a culture of strong ethics and values.
Very, very quickly, would you say that there is a correlation between the lack of accountability that we see and the diminishing role that ministerial accountability plays. The ministers are supposed to be responsible for their departments, but that seems less and less true all the time.
Oh, this is, I
Only
mean,
time for a yes or no answer, I'm afraid.
okay. It's complicated, but I love discussing ministerial accountability, so we should do this more.
Thanks.